Former U.S. Senator Barbara Mikulski once said, "I thought in this country the best social program was a job. Yet minimum wage jobs aren't paying enough to keep families out of poverty." The current federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, set in 2009 by the Fair Labor Standards Act. Today I'll be discussing why the minimum wage in America should be raised to $10.10 an hour. We'll be looking at why the minimum wage should be increased because of the economy outpacing wages, the benefit it can have to a substantial growth rate in the economy, a reduction in government costs, and then lastly, we'll be debunking some of those stereotypes about raising the minimum wage. Minimum wage was last reset in 2009 to $7.25. We all know that minimum wage does not keep up with the inflation of the dollar. But we also know that minimum wage doesn't keep up with production growth rate in America, and it also does not keep up with the top 1% or the top tier earners and CEOs of companies. If minimum wage had kept on track with the inflation since 1968, minimum wage would be somewhere around $12 an hour today. If it had kept pace since 1968 with production growth, it would be somewhere around $24 an hour today. Just 30 years ago, the average pay gap between CEOs and workers was 59-1. That was the ratio. Last year, the ratio jumped to 361-1. This year, the average CEO makes $13.9 million a year, while the minimum wage worker makes $15,000 a year. That's a ratio of 924-1. Raising the minimum wage would fuel an economic growth. Raising the minimum wage to $10.10 would inject roughly $22 billion net into the economy. When workers have more money, they'll spend more money. People who normally would not be able to afford going out to a restaurant, receiving an increase in income, they would now be able to afford some luxuries and put that money back into the economy, therefore giving the economy a growth. Mary Babek said in an article, 67% of small business owners support the minimum wage increase to $15 an hour. They say it would spark consumer demand, which would enable them to retain or hire new employees. Raising the minimum wage would also have a ripple effect, raising the incomes of people earning more than a minimum wage. Obviously, you would want to keep your more experienced employees. It would make the job market more competitive once again. And so researchers at the White House Council of Economic Advisors found that an increase to $10.10 an hour would raise wages for 28 million Americans. And that was an article found at Pros and Cons. That's close to 10% of America that would receive an increase in income. It would save taxpayers money and reduce the use of government programs. If low-income workers earned more money, they wouldn't need as much governmental programs. Higher income would disqualify people from food stamps and governmental assistance programs such as that. People would also be able to afford upgrades in homes, be able to rent out places rather than seek governmental housing programs. Lastly, we're going to bust some myths about raising the minimum wage. A lot of people think that it would be putting small businesses out of business. Like I said earlier, you would see a rise in consumer demand, which would be able to, if small businesses were able to meet this need, keep them in business. This would also help them because people would not be quitting. They wouldn't have such a high employee turnover rate. Employees would be more happy, also causing a increase in production and customer satisfaction. We also have to keep in mind certain jobs that could be factored from this, such as right now, waiters and waitresses. Even though the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, they only get paid about $2 to $3 an hour because of tips. They have to report their tips, and that will make up the difference. And so, that can still be in effect, which would mean that small businesses that have low profit margins would not be hit as hard. They would be able to stay open and keep seeing that profit. Another myth that a lot of people think is that the minimum wage is not supposed to be a livable wage, that it's only meant for teenagers or people right out of high school. That's not necessarily true. It was originally established as law because they wanted to ensure that jobs supported families. The minimum wage will keep a family of 3 under the poverty line right now. The job market is just not big enough to support everyone earning high value, high paying jobs. So not everyone can earn $50,000, $60,000 a year. The job market's just too narrow for increase or for betterment. So a lot of people who are forced to work minimum wage jobs, who are adults or late in life, they just have to get with what they're due. So to conclude, we can now see the effects of raising the minimum wage and what they can have on an economy, and an overwhelming benefit it has to low-level workers. And I'll leave you on a quote by Paul Krugman. He's a professor of economics at the Graduate Center of the University of New York and a columnist for the New York Times. We have a lot of evidence on what happens when you raise the minimum wage, and the evidence is overwhelmingly positive. Hiking the minimum wage has little or no adverse effect on employment while significantly increasing workers' earnings. Thank you very much.